Bring in Kamran Matin is Associate Professor of International Relations at the University of Sussex in the UK. Welcome. What more is Iran likely to do by way of retaliation, in your opinion?
Well, before actually Israeli attacks, Iranian supreme leader and various officials threatened that any attack by Israel will be retaliated by attacking US bases. In other words, they held US responsible for Israeli action. But more than a week into Israeli attacks, they did not attack American interests in the region. Now that US has joined actually the war, even though American officials, as we saw in the press conference, insist this was a very defined and limited attack. Nevertheless, Iran is in if you like, a very difficult situation, because on the one hand, it is in their interest that US involvement remains limited as much as possible, because if they join in any sustained way, militarily things become extremely more difficult for Iran. On the other hand, if they do not respond, that projects an image of weakness to the Iranians as well as to Islamic Republic's adversaries, which is not something they like to do. But if they decide to act, I think there are a few ways they could potentially damage or hurt American interests, including using some of their remaining proxies, especially in Iraq, where there are some US bases. Although up to now they had these forces had said they are not interested in getting involved directly, but after US attacks, we have to see whether they are changing their position. The other option, which often is talked about, is the closure of the Strait of Hormuz in the Persian Gulf, through which more than 25% of oil and gas is moving. That could have a massive impact on US, well, mostly probably European economy, but also global economy. But most importantly, it would actually deprive China from its oil imports from the region. And as you know, China is one of the two strategic partners of Iran, along with Russia. So I'm not entirely sure whether China would agree to such a closure, because it would damage their economy probably more than the Western economies. And finally, whether Iran would try to build actually a nuclear weapon with whatever it has left from its nuclear program after these attacks. But all of these involve massive risks, and we have to see how they weigh their options.
Kamran, what about the damage, though, to Iran? In retaliating, in continuing this war, how could that weaken the regime in Iran?
I mean, if regime change is not on US agenda, then actually, if the Iranian leaders are confident about this, then a prolonged conflict actually might be in their interest, because it will affect the global economy, the price of oil, which would push up inflation in Western economies, something they have been fighting to bring down for years now after the Ukraine's invasion by Russia. But also, for Iran simply to fire a couple of missiles every other day at Israel, it will have huge impact on the day-to-day life in Israel and its economy. Whereas Iran, as a heavily sanctioned country and having experienced war in the past, it might be more, and a much larger country, it might be more easy to absorb the impacts of a prolonged war. And that prolonged war would not be in Trump's interest either, because as we know, he's interested in quick wins, and he has a constituency who is very averse to sustained wars. So all of this, I think, will come into Iranian leadership's calculation as to how to respond. They haven't ruled out, even at this point, returning to diplomacy, but their condition is that Israeli attacks must stop, which I think is, can be seen as an attempt by Iran, even at this stage, to drive a wedge between US and Israel.
Kamran, what about on a personal level? How are Iranians coping with the situation right now? We've heard about the reports, and we've seen the footage of thousands of people, if not hundreds of thousands, fleeing.
Yes, indeed. I mean, as popular protests in Iran have shown over the last decade or so, in which thousands of people were killed and injured, unarmed protesters by Iranian security forces, you can imagine that a lot of Iranian, if not an absolute majority, particularly dislike and even hate Islamic Republic. On the other hand, it's very different to be under threat of bombing from the sky, nowhere to go with limited resources. There is little by way of civil defense provided by the regime. So most people I have talked to at least have mixed feeling. They are happy to see IRGC commanders or security forces commanders to be taken out by Israel, but there are also lots of civilian casualties. Daily life is being disrupted, and so on. But last couple of days, actually, a fear is growing among Iranians, because if the regime survives this war, i.e., it remains intact, especially its security and repressive organs, they might take a huge retaliation from the people. I mean, Iranian state TV openly threatens people, anyone who is remotely seen helping Israel, an accusation they can easily level against people. Then they would crack down on people. And people remember the 1988 mass executions of political prisoners. So people are very afraid of what happens if Iranian regime comes out intact after this war.
Okay, we'll have to leave it there. Kamran Matin, thank you very much for talking to us again here on DW.
Thank you.